Governor DeWine, once again, thanks so much for joining us today. We really do appreciate it. First of all, how you doing?
I'm well. Yeah. I'm talking to you from our home in Cedarville. So, do our work out of here now by phone a lot and conference calls all day. So yeah, it's kind of a different situation. But a lot of people are going through that, doing it remote.
Sure. We watched your briefing today, of course. How concerned are you with the spike in numbers we're seeing in Ohio?
Well, I'm very concerned with the spike we're seeing. We sort of expected it as schools come back in and kids are mixing together, and the same thing with our colleges and our universities. So we expected it to go up, and it has. We were taking the positivity rate down for about the last 2 months. It was down to a little bit below 4. So we were pretty happy about that. But in the last week, it's creeping back up.
I'm going to ask you to put your teacher's hat on for a second. What grade would you give Ohio schools overall for the way they've handled back to school so far?
As far as I can see, they get an A. I think our schools are doing a good job. They've made different decisions. Some have made decisions to be totally remote. Some have made the decisions to be a hybrid, and some are all in 5 days a week. And the ones who are all in, from what I can see, the superintendents, the principals, the teachers, everybody connected with the school have done everything they can to keep the students safe. And one of the things you're going to see, and we've already started to see, is that some schools are having to pull back. I talked to a school superintendent this morning from a school in Western Ohio, the Rushi school system, and they're pulling back their 7th through 12th graders. And it was the right thing to do, but it's not the school's fault. They have pretty widespread COVID, community spread. And when you see that, you're going to see it in your schools. There are going to be some kids who come in and probably have no symptoms, but they're carrying COVID. And so the schools just have to have a plan. What do they do when that happens? And they all have a plan. And it's all about tracing. It's all about making sure that child is taken care of and is separated from other kids and goes home, and then you try to worry about who that child has come in contact with. So it's basic what health departments do every day.
You've obviously had to make some very tough decisions over the last 6 or 7 months in related to the coronavirus. If you had to say the number one, the toughest question I had to face in these past 7 months, what would that be?
Oh, I think, they all are hard. The first decisions you make probably are the toughest. We had the Arnold Classic coming to Columbus, which it does every year, and a great event. But we looked at that and said, this makes no sense. We got people coming from 80 different countries. We've got 60,000 people over a 4-day period of time, many of them there every single day in a small area. So, that was a tough decision because no one had closed anything down really in this country. And so we were the first, so that was a tough decision. Looking back on it, it looks like an easy decision. So I think the first decisions are usually the toughest. But it's tough now because, what things that we can do now are really limited. And all along, it's really been up to the people of Ohio. We talked about flattening the curve early on. They did it. I didn't do it. They did it. What we're asking people to do now is to go about, live their lives, but be careful. Wear the mask when you're out in public. Make some sacrifices so that you can do other things. And as we go back to school now, and we want our kids in school, and we want our college kids to go to school. But as we're doing that, we've got to make some other sacrifices on the other side, and wearing a mask, keeping a distance, maybe not going to those parties that are very tempting, I know, for college students and for others, but pulling back from that, being careful, doing an event outside. Outside is so much safer than inside. So just making those individual decisions will frankly determine how well we get through this.
You also mentioned Labor Day, the upcoming Labor Day holiday, in your briefing today, and going along with what you just said, how we saw on the 4th of July people not social distancing in some cases, not wearing masks, also doing so at restaurants. Are you worried that on Labor Day people are going to forget and start going back to bad habits?
Well, I'm very worried about Labor Day. What we saw over the 4th of July is very natural in any other year, and that is people get together, they have parties, and they have picnics, and they do what they do. Same way with Labor Day. It's traditionally the last holiday in summer, and it's a big event. But we also know that after the 4th of July, we saw a significant uptick in cases. And it's not just a 16-year-old who may have no real symptoms. Sometimes they do, sometimes they get sick, but it may be somebody who doesn't have symptoms, but they in turn give it to somebody else, who then in turn gives it to somebody else. And maybe that person is 70 years old, or that person has asthma, or that person is diabetic. So, some real tragedy can come out of these contacts. We just ask people just to be careful. You got to live your life. This virus is not going to go away until we get the vaccine, and then it's going to take a while to run it to the ground. So we're going to be living with this for a while. So let's settle in. And what I tell people is none of the decisions that any of us make are made in a vacuum. You decide you want your child to go to school. Okay, there's a risk to that, but that's understandable decision to make. But in turn, what do we have to do to make sure these kids at least have a fighting chance of being able to stay in school? One is, all of us in a community have to pull back a little bit and not intermingle as much as we would like to.
Yeah. In your own travels, do you see people getting overconfident these days?
Well, I don't travel a whole lot, frankly. But I get reports from our team, and I think the mask compliance has gone up. I mean, when we put on the mask order in Cuyahoga County, it started. The mask compliance went up. It was pretty good before that, but it went up further dramatically, and that's why we've seen the cases go down in most of our cities. Our rural areas are a little more problematic. The mask wearing is not as good, and it's better than it was, but it's not as good, and therefore we're seeing an increase in cases in our rural areas. So, what's driving the increase now, and we had a high number today, but is our rural areas and our colleges, universities, and our K through 12 coming back. And some of that is just, we expected that, but we got to try to compensate on the other side some way and pull back from doing some other things.
The professional football season starts a week from Sunday. Are you confident we're going to have an NFL season in Ohio this year?
Yeah, I think we'll have an NFL season in Ohio. I think the teams are going to look. They've got the resources. They've got the plan. They can do the testing. It's very, very different. Someone emailed me the other day and said, how come my son can't play two different teams in one day, but the Reds could do a doubleheader? Well, first of all, the Reds were playing against the same team, and that would be allowed under our order. But the real difference is that these professional teams are testing every other day, probably, and they're controlling the situation, and they have the ability to do very, very, very aggressive testing. So I think that we can certainly see NFL football just as we're seeing baseball, just as we're seeing the Indians and the Reds play now. Whether we're going to see fans at the NFL, I talked a few days ago to Dee and Jimmy Haslam. We've talked several times about this. They've got a very good plan, but when we're seeing these numbers go up, we're hesitant, frankly, to allow fans yet, although it's certainly something that we could see, in the future. And when we see that, it's going to be smaller number of fans. But as I said, the Browns have a very good plan. They basically have fans in 4 different quadrants. People in one quadrant will not interact at all with the other ones, and the numbers will be very low. I mean, they'll be very significantly low from what normally we would see at an NFL football game.
Governor, walk me through how this would work if there was a spike in numbers and the state determined that there was an issue. Would your office be the office that would step in and say, okay, no more fans, or further limit the number of fans who can come?
Well, you're about 2 steps ahead of me, but I understand. Um, what we've done in our health order, we've basically limited to 1,500 fans for high school, or 15%, whichever is the lowest. But we have exceptions there, to make sure that high school football or high school soccer, that the parents can come, even if it goes beyond that 15%. So as we look at NFL football, as we look at professional soccer, for example, that would be on a special plan that would be submitted by the team to the state health department, and the state health department would determine, whether that plan worked. And I'll tell you, after looking at the Browns' plan, it's a good plan. I think the only question is, when and how many fans.
And I respectfully disagree with you. I'm 2 steps behind you, actually, Governor. So thanks for answering that question. I really do appreciate it. Final question. Final question before we go, because I know we're running short on time here. This is a political question. A member of your own party has filed articles of impeachment. I know that the rough and tumble world of politics is nothing new to you, but as someone who has been around the block, who is sitting in that seat right now, how does that feel when someone of your own party goes to that length to get you out of office?
Well, the 4 members that did that have been very, very, very critical of the state health department. They've been very critical of our health orders, so it probably wasn't a real shock that they filed impeachment. And look, they have every right to file whatever they want to file. But my focus has to stay on protecting the people of the state and getting our economy moving faster. We think those two are related together. We've got to keep this virus down, the fire down. We're not going to put it out. We don't have the water to throw on it and put it out yet, but we can keep it down. And if we keep it down, then we'll be able to see the economy grow, and we'll be able to save lives. And so that's really what I have to focus on every day. That's what I think about from the time I get up and until the time I go to bed. So I'm not going to spend much time thinking about articles of impeachment.